Good morning. Yeah, relatively short notice. I had approximately 4 hours for this one, so I kind of have to ask for your forgiveness. I also have to find the clicker as well. So I'm talking about data. And I know data is kind of the suit du jour for everyone. Everyone wants to talk about it. And a lot of the conversation about data goes on in the context of collecting data or collecting higher quality data or making or something in that region. And I would argue that there's plenty of data. There's a lot of it. 2.3 exabytes by 2020. This is sort of 2.5 times the kind of 2016 estimate of all the world's data centers. This is just health data. That's if you add up wearables, medical records, and everything related to health data. That's a lot of data. If you think about it for your data after you die, it's actually easier to donate your organs than it is to donate your data after you die, which is pretty terrifying actually when you think about it. And that data lives on in those medical record systems, unaccessed very often, surrounded by a layer of protection, legal, technical, and that protection sometimes calcifies that data. And in that protection, we limit its use. And I would contend that the goal now is not to collect more data, it is to unlock the data that is already available. We talk a lot about AI. That's kind of, again, that's very much the new hype. As blockchain dies, AI rises. And if you look at these different algorithms, the different methods for doing AI, and this isn't mine, and you ask people the different ways you can do AI, the different things you define as AI, you get a lot of different answers. But I would estimate out of these different methods, only 2 don't require some type of health data set for health analytics for this, don't require raw health data either to train an algorithm or to validate an algorithm or something related to building those rule sets. And if we can unlock this data, then I think we can make this much more accessible. And there are some real challenges. This calcified layer around that data, that sphere of protection, exists in the form of interoperability problems, administrative problems, and information governance problems. And what we're trying to do at Dovetail is we're trying to help people take a step in the right direction. So everyone says, we're going to do AI. So what do you do on Monday morning when you come in and you've decided on Friday evening, how are you going to get there? Most companies, most organizations already have access to a lot of this data. And in healthcare, this is doubly true. So blockchain and distributed ledgers are part of the answer. They are not the whole answer, but they are part of the answer. Someone I work for is in the audience who actually taught me about this years ago in the Information Governance, Information Security Forum, and I've cheekily added on a 4th one. But for information security, there's kind of 3 main principles and then potentially a 4th. It's integrity, availability, non-repudiability, and confidentiality. And I think it's important in the context of distributed ledgers, and I can talk at the end if people are interested about what particular systems we use. But in the context of distributed ledgers, it's important to talk about strengths and weaknesses. And blockchain applies differently in these 4 different areas. In terms of integrity, that's making sure that your data is the same way when you come back to it next week as it was last week. You can imagine healthcare, hugely important. Business data, it's a big part of healthcare in this country. Clinically critical data, you enter something into the system one week, you come back next week for the operation. Is it still the same? Legal cases, is it still the same 30 years later when you come to litigate that case? Hugely critical. Blockchain plays a part in integrity. If you hash your data, you put it on a network, a public network or a private network, you know when you come back to it, there's a very high likelihood that data is the same now as it was when you first put it onto it. Availability, really important in healthcare. We now have a new Caldecott guideline, the duty to share. This is really important. It used to be healthcare was all about protecting data and not sharing it, and people died because there were people in the hospital 2 floors down, and they said, can we share this data? We've got this data, can we share it with the surgeon? They said, I don't think so. So there's this concern, and the NHS and the government have actually moved and solved this with the new Caldecott guideline, the duty to share. Availability, the data has to be available to share. with people as and when it's the right time. Confidentiality, hugely important for medical records. Blockchain, not so strong confidentiality. So you have to overcome that with technical answers. It's a public network. Even if it's a private network, it's between you and other people. That's not confidentiality. So you need solutions to overcome that. And at Dovetail, we have those solutions, I believe. Non-repudiability, the most important. I say I'm going to do something. You say, you check, you can be assured that if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. You can prove that I did say that I was going to do it. Consent. That's the core of what we do at Dovetail, consent, patient consent. Patient consent is 5 or 6 different things. It covers all types of things. But in this context, consent to share data. Consent to share your data with a surgeon, with wellness teachers, with yoga teachers, with friends, with family, with parents, with all kinds of providers. We'll get on a bit more to the details of that. But if I give consent, and you take my consent, and you act on it, you need to be sure that I can't turn around in a few years' time and say, I don't remember that. I don't remember giving consent. You need to be rock solid sure that we all agree that I gave consent for it to mean anything. Otherwise, it just introduces risk. And blockchain is absolutely, this is its real strength. Distributed ledgers, this is where its real strength lies. It happens on that private or public network. It can be assured. It's locked into those series of hashes. I'm not going to explain the whole thing. But that's where the real strength lies. Now we come to, oh, that's not showing up at all. Can anyone see that? You can see it. Okay, fine. So when it comes to data sharing, this is what I'm really talking about. It's what I want to hone in on. About unlocking that data. So you have to share it to unlock it. There are 5 ways of sharing data in the European Union. And it isn't just the European Union, because there are places in America where they're introducing privacy legislation which follows the GDPR model. And also, mostly, GDPR gets a bad rep, but mostly it is fair, it is reasonable, it is ethical. So I believe that will become much more of a global standard. And those 5 bases, and you can see them, but I can't see them, so I'm going to have to do it off the top of my head, are consent, public interest, public interest, consent, contract, legal obligation, and legitimate interest. And of those 5, if you ask the BMA what you're allowed to use to share medical data, they say you can actually only use 3. And the 3 that you're allowed to use are consent, public task, and legitimate interest. Legitimate interest is the easiest. If somebody's dying, you can share their data, and it is relative to how much they're dying. And if they're really dying, you can really share their data. Okay? But if it's just to go, now we have this social prescription. So you say to people, hey, I'm not going to give you blood pressure medication. I'm going to refer you to a walking club. This happens in Bristol, where I'm from. And they give you a prescription. They write it out for you, walking club. But the person who runs a walking club isn't a clinician. So it's no longer is it your legitimate interest. It's not implied consent for direct care. It's now much more fuzzy. Is that your legitimate interest? Because that's not where the law came from. The law came from direct healthcare, clinicians, nurses, doctors. So this is fuzzy. Public task, this happens all the time. People don't know about it, but this happens all the time. It goes to universities. Universities work on this data in an anonymized format. But if it's anonymized, how do you tell someone, right, I know that you're dying of cancer today. I'd like your anonymized data, and we're going to do a trial, but it's going to take 20 years. And if we find out you've got anything wrong with you, we don't have your number because it's anonymized. We don't have your name because it's anonymized. So, sorry. It's not really good enough. Or if we're sharing data for you to go to a walking club, and you get there and they say, sorry, are you 2A, B, 3, 4, 6, because you've anonymized the data with a random string? Say, no, I'm William Nash. So if you anonymize the data, you lose all the interest. So you're left with just consent. How am I doing time? So this is what we work on. We have a solution, I think. I would call it infrastructure for consent, slightly on the product design technical side. I'd call it infrastructure for consent. It doesn't really exist. Consent is scary. If you take consent for data to be shared, you then are responsible to undo that if they come back on you. And if it's on a bit of paper, and if it's down in the basement where most of these consent forms are kept, you are forming yourself a legal obligation. When they say no to it, you have to go and find that, and you have to go and find the person you gave it to, and you have to make sure the data sharing stops. And if you don't have infrastructure, if you don't have a consistent way of treating that consent, giving, withdrawing, then it's impossible. And that really scares people off consent. And so they fall back on legitimate interest, and they say, okay, we'll just use legitimate interest. We won't share the data. So consent, and an infrastructure for consent, which does involve the blockchain and storing consent, not medical data. That stays in the EHRs, the electronic healthcare records. You have sharing requests, and data is encrypted, as everyone knows it should be. And most of these technologies are things that already exist, but it's hard work. And then what's not on here is interoperability. That's hard work as well, but you have to do it. And we do, and other companies are doing it, and we're getting better. If anyone knows about FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource, or SNOMED, there is a lot of progress happening on getting those interoperability standards. So this is all happening at a really good time, and it is beginning to kind of open up that data. And as you kind of crack it open with consent, you start to see all the value that's coming out. Why? So Dovetail, we now work with a company called EMIS Group, who are the largest healthcare record provider in the UK. Lots of good reasons why that makes sense. Some of them are up here. I kind of won't talk too much, but they're great to work with. Very interesting, very forward thinking. We've also got other partners. Obviously, some of them I haven't got up on here because some of the work is, pending. But these are all people who kind of recognize that you have to take that first step, particularly around data sharing. You have to kind of first start by asking people, is it okay if I do this? Not assuming, saying, is that all right? And then saying, if they say no, saying, and that's okay. We won't share your data. So these are the people who've kind of started the journey with us. I think I've finished with a few minutes left to spare, which is good, and is nice. So either I will leave you in peace and we will catch up, or it'd be nice if take maybe 1 or 2 questions, if anyone has any kind of burning questions. I won't force you. Yeah. Is there a mic? Yes. Well, you can probably just shout out. I might be able to repeat it.
Just a question, clearly, value of data is best if everybody who contributes that value gets a stake in it. Do you think there's a need for a data fair trade, something that is in legislation which says if your data turns out to be super value, you should have a little bit of part of that action?
I mean, I can't comment on policy. I don't know if everyone heard the question, whether there should be like a data fair trade. I can't comment on policy. I think that there has to be a trade. There has to be some reason for, if we create systems like the systems that I think we should, based on consenting, you can't force anyone's arm anymore. So it immediately becomes a fair trade. Because if you give informed consent, you knew what you were consenting to, you knew what the value was up front, and it's handled by a respectable organization, then I think broadly people are okay with that. This is borne out in the data. If you ask people, are they okay to share their data off the bat, they have a mixed response. If you ask people, would you be okay to share your data if you knew it would contribute to life-changing research, most people are very happy to do that. They're especially happy if they or their family member have a particular condition and the research is about that condition. So I think by asking for consent, we automatically create fair trades. I can't comment on policy, that's way beyond my pay grade and politicians, but I think by asking for consent, you do create automatically that.
I would disagree that there are two economies. One is social good, and there is market.
Yeah.
Everybody should be in both economies. You just quoted the social good one. People who benefit get the social good. But if a drug company makes £1 billion out of the subjects, then it would be happier with a few monetary benefits as well as lots of consumer
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah. Are there any other questions, or fire away, and then I'll wrap up if that's good timing for you.
Really interesting. When are you going to switch to Ethereum?
Never.
That's the wrong answer.
Over my dead body.
There's another wrong answer. Fail.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah. There's a lot of zealots. I've been, from my young age, I've been in blockchain a bit too long, and there are a lot of zealots now, and not long enough. Well. No, we use Hyperledger Fabric. We're very happy with it. Hyperledger Fabric, there'll be a kind of mixed knowledge in here, but we take advantage of the private channels in Hyperledger Fabric to kind of limit the leakage. There's a lot of metadata you can kind of grasp from those more public networks, the networks that were designed as public. I totally get why people have a preference for networks that were designed from the ground up as public networks. Certainly from an ideological perspective, that's how I came into it. But from my perspective, when you get down to kind of personal, you talk about people's like SDI diagnosis, you talk about really super personal information, your philosophy starts to weaken and you start to go with the technical solution that in your opinion is really the kind of strongest and most enterprise ready. So we're very happy with Hyperledger. You're not an Ethereum salesman, are you? But we're very happy with it. All right, well, thank you very much for listening. Appreciate you guys listening at short notice as well, but thanks for your time.